Well, thanks for inviting me along this afternoon to talk about my book, Get Off the Grass. It's actually been out for a while now, so it's a book I co-wrote with Sir Paul Callahan in 2013. So it's always a pleasure to come and talk about it again and maybe sell a few copies, or at least in this case, we're giving away a few copies at the end. You know, there's a 24-hour version of this talk, there's a 1-hour version of this talk, there's a 5-minute version of this talk. I'm going to aim for about half an hour. So really this is just to sort of whet your appetite into some of the things that I do as part of my research and some of my thinking around the economy, as well as some of the things that Paul did and talked about. So actually I'd like to sort of go back to our glory days a little bit when I start thinking about innovation in New Zealand. You know, when New Zealand was first settled by people, the people that navigated their way here, they were using cutting-edge technology for their day, right? There was no one else who was able to navigate the Pacific and come to New Zealand. And it would be another 700-800 years before other peoples came to this part of the world. And so, you know, quite rightfully, you know, 800 years ago, we could claim we were one of the most innovative places in the world, thanks to the technologies that got us here. And then, you know, 200 years ago, the tangata whenua were joined by the Europeans, and again at the time they were the bearers of the cutting-edge technology. Right, they were now able to sail right around the world and come to New Zealand, and the coming together of these two very innovative peoples that had mastered leading-edge technologies produced a real boom of innovation. And you can actually, it's interesting, you can measure it in a whole lot of ways. You know, one way, we talk about the treaty, it gets a little bit of a bad reputation these days, but it's actually a very innovative political document, right? There are very few other countries, certainly countries that are colonised, like New Zealand, that have a political document like this. Countries like Canada and the US and Australia don't have this sense of partnership between the indigenous peoples and the settlers. So we can claim that we were politically innovative 100 years ago. We were socially innovative. We were also one of the first countries to give women the vote. And so we were social innovators. And of course we were also technological innovators. If you go back to 1900, we were producing more patents per person than any other country in the world. Right? So we were innovating in a very real sense. And of course, you know, our economy was being built by innovating in our primary sector. So if you travel around the small coastal towns of New Zealand, you'll see the freezing works, you'll see the jetties and wharfs at those freezing works, and that's because we've developed refrigerated shipping. Right? We could now freeze meat and send it to the other side of the world, and that's really where we built our economy. And so, you know, in the 1900s, there was a lot of signs that we were at the real cusp of an economic revolution. However, I like to pick up the story next when I was born. So I was born in 1970. Now, in 1970, you know, things were not looking too bad. We perhaps hadn't lived up completely to our promise, but we were still in the group of countries right at the top of the wealth per capita. Right. So I've got real GDP per capita here. And we were certainly up there. We're a little bit behind Australia and countries like Denmark that we might compare ourselves to, but we were ahead of Finland and certainly in that group of richest countries in the world, at least measured in terms of GDP per capita, and certainly well ahead of countries like South Korea. They were a long way behind. Fast forward to today, and things have really changed. Right? You can see from the growth of our GDP per capita, we've really been on a different path to a lot of these other countries. So, you know, Australia, Finland, Denmark, they've grown at a rate, their economy has grown at a rate much faster than ours, and so they've left us behind. Countries like South Korea, that were very, very poor in 1970, have actually passed us in GDP per capita. And this is actually the kind of timescale I'm interested in. When I'm trying to understand the economy, and look at trends in the economy, I'm interested in looking at changes that happen over decades. And that's really where my research is focused. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that and why I think that is, and then what we can do about it. So, you know, one way of looking at GDP per capita is to break it down into productivity and labour utilisation. So I've done that here. So New Zealand, you can break that into the number of hours worked per person and the GDP per hour worked, right? How much value we're adding per hour worked. And so that's New Zealand's split, right? And then you can compare us to some of the other countries that were on our previous chart. So you can see Denmark and Finland. Well, in terms of GDP per hour worked, they're quite a ways ahead of us, right? If you look at this plot, you'll see that we're getting a lot of our we're getting a lot of the value in our economy simply by having a relatively large proportion of our population in work. Countries like Singapore, certainly more so, right? They've got very high labour utilisation, whereas Denmark and Norway are behind us in labour utilisation, but way ahead of us in terms of labour productivity. Right? So that's really the story of New Zealand, and if you look at where our economic growth has come from, it's come from increases in labour utilisation, not in increases in labour productivity over the last few decades. Whoops, and yeah, okay. I think I'll just exit that and hope that nothing goes wrong. Okay, and right, it's no, now that has yeah, okay. It's election year, right? So a lot of the discussion, and we've already heard it, will be about tax, right? We'll be talking about tax, and the current government is already talking about tax cuts, and often that's as sophisticated as our public discussion gets about our economy, right? We think that if we put taxes up, our GDP goes down, or our economy doesn't grow as fast. If we put taxes down, our economy will grow faster. But when you look at where our taxation rates are in a global context, you'll see that it's much more complicated. We're way down at the bottom, right? So we're, as a percentage of GDP, our government has much less role in our economy than countries like Denmark and Finland, who we're comparing ourselves to before. Their government has a much bigger role in the economy. So yes, tax and government role in the economy does play an important part in how the economy functions, but it's perhaps less about the scale and more about what you are doing and what governments are doing, right? So it's a more complicated picture than we often talk about in New Zealand. Right, so here at the Manufacturers Forum, part of what's going on has to do with what you guys are up to. Now we know, here's what I've done is I've broken down exports, and I've just split it into manufacturing and primary sector, and I've lumped the primary sector together in a big green blob, and then I've split up manufacturing into smaller slices based on subcategories. And as we know, primary sector still dominates in terms of our exports, but manufacturing is certainly very important. But then compare things to Denmark. Okay, so you can see that one of the reasons that Denmark is ahead of us in terms of GDP per capita is that they're exporting a heck of a lot more. Now their primary sector is about the same size as ours in terms of value, but their manufacturing sector is much larger. Now there's a number of reasons for that, and one of course is their distance from markets. Right, as you get closer to markets, your exports grow, but that's not the entire story. Partly what's going on in countries like Denmark and the Scandinavian countries is that they're innovating more than we are. And you can measure this in a number of ways. You can look at how much they're spending on research and development, and I'll come back to that towards the end. Or you can actually look at measures like patents per capita. So this is patents per million people. And again, you can see that Denmark, I haven't got Finland marked out there, but it's up there right near the top. Countries that we think of as having strong, innovative manufacturing sectors are producing a much larger number of patents per person than we are. And we're certainly back at the other end. Right now, patents are a kind of a crude measure, right? They're not important for every industry. To some industries, they're very important. But nonetheless, they give us an opportunity, because they're an open record of what's being done in a particular country. They give us an opportunity to really get in and study how innovation works. And so this is really where my research is focused, is trying to understand why Denmark is producing something like 25 patents per million people, and New Zealand's producing something like 3 or 4. Okay, so what we've done is we've delved into the patent database and tried to use as much information as we can from what's going on in patents. What this plot shows you is the location of all the inventors that are named on patents in New Zealand over about 30 years. So we took a particular slice of time from the late 1970s through to the late 2000s. We identified all the people who were named as inventors on patents. And then because you have to put your home address in when you assign a patent, we located you. I don't know if there are any patent holders in here. Mark, for example. So Mark, I know for sure you're in here because I checked once. So we found out where you live, Mark, and put a little dot on the map. Then we did something else, right? Because when you're inventing, right, you're often working with other people. Those people also get named on those patents, right? So if you've invented something and you've worked with someone else on that patent, then you'll be named on that same document. And so from that, we can kind of work out the social network of inventors. So Mark, who else is on your patents?
Oh, a company owner.
Yep.
And a colleague from Graham Finch.
Right, Graham Finch. Okay, yep. So we'd have found Graham Finch and you, and would have connected you with one of these white lines, right? So we've basically reconstructed, this is like the Facebook of inventors in New Zealand, right? And so we've done that worldwide, right? You can see there's a lot of dots, a lot of lines going off, right, to other parts of the world because we do collaborate, we do invent things with people from other parts of the world. But what's really interesting is what we can get now from this particular data set, now that we've reconstructed it in a certain way. And the first thing that comes up, and economists call these things stylized facts. They're sort of things that they're not exactly true, but they're roughly true, right, as a rule of thumb. So the first thing we found, and we weren't the first people to find this, was that larger cities produce more patents per person, right? So it turns out that Christchurch produces the New Zealand average number of patents, right? So if you're looking for sort of the average New Zealand place of New Zealand inventiveness, that's Christchurch. Auckland, as a bigger city, produces more patents per person, produces about 30% more. If you go to Sydney, right, which is an even bigger city, Sydney's producing more patents per person than Auckland. And if you go to Tokyo, Tokyo's producing more patents per person than Sydney, right? So it's not just that these cities are larger and therefore are producing more patents. It's the fact that per person, they're producing more patents, right? And so that's an interesting fact that's been observed in all the advanced economies, right? If you go to larger cities, you're getting more patents per person coming out. So it's interesting to start thinking about, well, why might that be? What's going on? And we can get some evidence for what's going on by looking at the social networks of inventors. Okay, so if we zoom in, so Mark, you're somewhere, we're getting closer to you. You might want to, yeah, out west somewhere. So you're one of the dots up in the hills there. We can actually start looking at the social networks. And what we find is, again, in bigger cities, people are more densely connected, right? So there are more people patenting, but these people actually have denser social networks. And so that, when you think about it, at first that's a bit counterintuitive. It was mentioned I was from Palmerston North, right? When I go back to Palmerston North and walk around the square, right, I'll bump into people I know, mostly my relatives, right? And you know, you feel like you're in a rich, dense social network. But actually, it's in Auckland where inventors enjoy that richer, denser social network, right? So partly the reason that we come to Auckland to work and to innovate is because we can access that pool of other people around us. And so that's part of the reason why bigger cities produce more patents per capita, is because you've got opportunities to benefit from other people around you, and that makes you more inventive, which I'll discuss a little bit more. So larger cities have denser networks of innovators. And so that's a little bit depressing for New Zealand, right? If we're thinking about trying to innovate our way towards export growth and towards more manufacturing, right? We don't have a city the size of Sydney, certainly not Tokyo. So we're at this disadvantage, right? We don't have access to those to the same networks that someone in Sydney might have, and that's why I've started to think about what is it that we can do. Well, one thing we can do is we can connect and share as if we're a city of 4 million people, right? Let's let's try and not think of New Zealand as composed of a bunch of cities, but let's start to think of New Zealand actually as a giant city, right, where we can actually all work together and connect. And then that starts to give you some ideas around the types of policies that you might implement to try and increase our access to good ideas from other people. So I call that the city of 4 million people. And of course, actually this also tells us that connecting offshore is also very important, right? We want to benefit from what's going on in Sydney and in Tokyo as much as possible to compensate for the lack of size and scale that we have here in New Zealand. I'm going to come back to think about what it is that we do, right? So this is kind of the get off the grass part. It was interesting when that book first came out. I got an enormous number of invites to go talk to the primary sector, and they were actually relatively polite. It was only occasionally that I got a strip torn off me, and it was actually more for the fact that I'd moved to Auckland than I was telling them to get off the grass. Anyway, so I'm going to roll things back to 1995, right? And this is the composition of our exports in 1995, and I'm going to compare us to Denmark again, which is always a bit sobering because they always seem to be ahead of us in this game. But back in 1995, right, our largest export was lamb meat, okay, frozen lamb, which was our product that we'd pioneered in the 1900s. And Denmark was Danish bacon, right? So that was their largest export. Fast forward to 2010, and of course we know that our dairy sector, we deregulated our economy in the 1980s. We'd exposed our primary sector to offshore competition, and it was ready to respond to changes in market demand. And of course, now our biggest export is milk powder. So and we're even more dependent on that than we were on lamb meat. What happened in Denmark over that time? Okay, well, their largest export is now pharmaceuticals. Okay, now again, if I go talk to the primary sector, they are a bit like, so what? There's a lot of science that goes into pharmaceuticals, and there's a lot of science that goes into our primary sector, and that's true to a certain extent. But there's some important differences between what it takes to manufacture pharmaceuticals and what it takes to succeed in the dairy sector. So to explain that, I'm going to, if Stephen could have a shameless plug for his survey, let me put in another shameless plug for my book, because there's a really great innovation on the cover of the book, and if you're lucky enough to win a copy at the end, you'll get to look at this in more detail. But it's the barcode. Okay, it's really, I love this example, not only because it helps me sell books, but also because it really illustrates the way that innovation occurs. Right now, the barcode actually requires two different ideas to come together to actually work. Right, and the first is the actual code itself. Right, and actually it turns out that was the idea behind the barcode came from the US railways. Right, so I don't know quite the backstory to this, but they were losing wagons in sidings in the US, and someone had this idea that they would paint coloured stripes on the side, right, and each of these coloured patterns would be unique to a particular wagon, and then you could find the wagon. I'm not quite sure what you were then supposed to do. If you had a big flip book to go through to figure out where your wagon was. But it didn't work, right? They tried it for about 18 months and then gave up. And actually what they needed was the laser, okay, which we now use to read barcodes. And the laser was invented about the same time, so it was the early 1960s when they were painting these coloured strips on their wagons, and actually the laser was invented in the early 1960s as well. No one, if you look back and try to figure, what commercial application were they trying to go for with the laser? No one had any idea, right? They just thought it would be cool. And it actually turned out that the first commercial application of the laser was to read barcodes in the late 1970s, right? So it took 15 years for these two technologies to be brought together to create something that actually had market value, right? And that's this idea of combinatoric innovation, right? That most ideas are not genuinely new. They're combinations of previous ideas and new combinations of previous ideas. And so that starts to tell you that diversity economic diversity and technological diversity might be important for innovation, right? If you're in Auckland, what technologies do you have access to around, right, and capabilities do you have access to within your city that can help you take your idea and turn it into something that has market value? And that turns out to be broadly true. So again, this is one of these stylized facts. We've looked around the world, we've looked at patents, we've looked at what different cities around the world, what types of technologies they're patenting in, right? And then we've looked at how novel those technologies are, right? And it turns out there's a very strong relationship between diversity, and here I've aggregated everything to the country level just to explain it. So some countries like Denmark are very, very diverse, right? So there's lots of different types of technologies that they specialise in. And it also turns out that the types of technologies that they specialise in are very novel, right? And by novel, I mean there are not many other parts of the world that can replicate that, right? So one of the things about pharmaceuticals is that there are very, very few places that are good at producing pharmaceuticals, right? Whereas we're at the other end, we're a very, very specialised economy in general. If you average over the whole country, there is some good news. Auckland, relatively speaking, for a city this size, is pretty diverse. So there is some good news for Auckland. But overall, the products that we tend to specialise in are very ubiquitous, i.e. there are lots of other places that can produce similar products. Right? So that's why we should be a little bit concerned that we've specialised in dairy, which is something relatively ubiquitous, whereas the Danes have gone into something that's relatively novel. And that's why diversity is important. Okay, so then my second point is that we do need to get off the grass. We do need to diversify our economy if we're going to create opportunities going forward. Okay, the other thing, and I was tempted to replot this data today because there were some new R&D figures that came out yesterday, but I didn't in the end. I'll tell you why in a minute. So this is Denmark. Again, go back to the 1980s. And so in 1980, they were spending about 1% of GDP on research and development. And by 2010, it was up around 3%, right? So they've tripled the fraction of their GDP that's going into R&D. Right, and here's New Zealand. We were spending around 1% of GDP on R&D in 1980. And in 2010, we were still spending about 1% of GDP in 1980. You can just see, and there's a little bump. That was the knowledge wave that sort of came through, more a kind of a knowledge splash or something. And the reason I wasn't, at first I thought I really will go update this and put in, because there was some good news, right? We have seen a big jump in spending on R&D. Just the 2016 numbers have gone up from 2014. But then I actually thought, no, you won't even, it's still big for us, but it won't be detectable on this graph, so I won't bother. To actually get to the OECD average, we need to do what we've done over the last 2 years for another 20 years, right? And that'll bring us up to the average. That'll bring us up to just under 2%. So we've got a long way to go. It'll be a while before I have to replot this diagram. So actually, you know, we really do need to invest in R&D and science and innovation. So that's kind of my third point. And then I'm just going to, just to finish off, I'll tell you a little story about the way we think of ourselves and what we do in New Zealand. And so I'm going to tell you about 2 New Zealand innovations. The first is Icebreaker, sort of a classic New Zealand thing. You know, we see it overseas, and it's something to be proud of that we're selling these upmarket products around the world, and it's based on the merino wool fibre, right? And if there's anything that New Zealanders know about, it's wool. So we can be pretty confident that we'll be good at that. You know, classic New Zealand invention story. You're on an island, and you have a chat to a farmer, and you come up with this idea for high-value merino products, right? And last time I checked, it had revenues of about US $150 million, right? So a New Zealand success story. There's another New Zealand technology. Has revenues of about, is now, there's a company that has revenues of about $3 billion US dollars. It was come up with, this product was come up with in Parnell, so not far from here. Expanded polytetrafluoroethylene. Does anyone? Sorry?
Expanding foam?
Not quite. No, I know. Mark, you're going to tell us? Okay, so it's Gore-Tex, right? Actually, so polytetrafluoroethylene is Teflon, right? And if you stretch Teflon, hence the expanded, right? If you do it in just the right way, you perforate it, right? And so Gore-Tex is basically Teflon that's been stretched to the point where there are little holes in the Teflon, right? So water vapor can get through, but water droplets get repelled by the Teflon. And so it's a really interesting story as to why this is not a New Zealand company, which is in the book. So I won't spoil that. Go out and read the story, but it isn't. And one of the reasons I think is, does this sound like something New Zealanders should be good at? Expanded polytetrafluoroethylene, right? It doesn't sound like your classic, like if we're telling stories about ourselves, we wouldn't, we'll tell stories about wool and our green landscapes. Most New Zealanders won't brag about their expanded polytetrafluoroethylene. And I think you can see this reflected in the marketing, right? So, and in fact, one of the, really in some ways, Icebreaker has been a marketing innovation, right? It was very, very strong marketing, and I think got it to where it is today. And when you look at it, okay, there's always some slightly strange inbred-looking people in the pictures, but it's always set in the New Zealand landscape, right? I mean, we use here as a product that's using the New Zealand landscape to sell itself, right? And we're very, again, as New Zealanders, we're very comfortable with that. We do that all the time. Look at Gore-Tex. It's not going to win any awards for marketing, right? But it's a very confident piece of marketing. It just says we have a product that works. They're not drawing on their landscape in the US. They're just saying this product will keep you dry. And so, to me, it's partly about the stories we tell ourselves, right? We're convinced that we can sell things off the back of our clean green image, off our landscape. We're not as convinced sometimes that actually we're just smart and we've got clever products. And I think that comes out sometimes in our marketing. So really, that's my last point, and this is where I'll end it. We need to see ourselves as people of knowledge, right? We need to realise that we're smart, that we have products and technologies that can compete with the rest of the world, and be confident in telling that story.